So, guys, I want to review the short film 2 plus 2 equals 22. And I'm not sure exactly the name of this short film, but what it is about this kid who takes a math test and he's like in first grade and he gets an F on that. And what happens is that he thinks 2 plus 2 equals 22. And what happens is teacher says, no, 2 plus 2 is 4. And he actually shows him like with two markers and put it together. And he actually gets mad and slaps like the markers off the desk, and then his parents come in and says like, how dare you question my child? Are you my child's a free thinker and all that, and they slap they slap the teacher. And then what happens is that there's a protest, and then there's actually parents like picketing with like signs saying 2 plus 2 equals 22, and really saying that nowadays you need to just be a free thinker and all that, and accept that there's different answers and solutions to math. And the teacher's saying, no, it's 2 plus 2 equals 4, and that's just what it is. And she ends up getting suspended, then she gets fired, and then what she does is that she gets a severance package, so it's $2,000 plus $2,000, and she said, no, that's $22,000. And he kind of gives like a smile at the end, really, because it's that little joke that when it comes to math and when it comes to owing somebody money, you want to make sure that the number is accurate. If it's a false number, or the number's not accurate, they're not going to be willing to pay her the extra $18,000, really. But there's a lot of points to this. There is that first point with what we see in a lot of American culture nowadays, which is free thinking over wrong answers. There's a lot of times like you look at art, or let's say if a kid does a drawing and it's kind of like not that well made, and there's a kid who meticulously draws something and they spend hours upon hours, or they spend class time upon class time in art class. There's a lot of teachers, there's a lot of people nowadays that would say, okay, well, the kid who the kid who spent less time and drew in like 2 minutes should get an A plus, the same way that other kids should get an A plus. Or sometimes there are parents or there are kids that are actually wrong about something, and they're going to be stubborn to their beliefs. I actually remember having a teacher named Mrs. Corngluth in high school, but I remember like there was a typo in her name, Mrs. Corngluth, and I remember like my dad always saying her name wrong at the dinner table, and I said, like, Dad, it's Mrs. Corngluth, there was a typo, and he said, no, I'm correct, you're going to say her name correctly. And then he actually got so mad, my dad actually forced me to write the wrong answer down 100 times, and then he had a meeting with the teacher about every like 3 or 4 months, like they had a meeting about just to see how I was doing in school. That was just how my school was run, and then he actually found out that he was wrong. Or I remember I would say Tom Brokaw or Peter Jennings, and my dad was actually wrong. He actually said their names incorrectly, so he made me write down the answer so many times because he was very stubborn about about saying that I was even though I was right, he didn't want to be corrected, and that works as well. Where there's sometimes parents that are wrong, they were going to teach their kid the wrong answer or force it down their throat, really. Or sometimes you have children that are wrong about something, and they're going to actually have parents that are going to agree with them, even though they're both wrong, because of what we kind of see. I think call it toxic support, really. That sometimes we're always free thinking, and we're always encouraging children to kind of like think for themselves, or there's multiple types of answers to math or other things, or there's multiple interpretations to a piece of literature or something like that. Sometimes if you have people that are overly supportive of their children, you live in a world where people can't be wrong, and that's never good, because then you're teaching that everybody has to agree with what with what you agree with. And that we don't live in a very progressive society. I do think this is also very important too, because obviously, she gets slapped by a parent, and you see that happen a lot nowadays, where kids have bad behavior. The kid slaps the markers, the parent slaps her. So there is a sense of what you also see a lot of like parenting nowadays is where kids learn bad behavior from the parents. Sometimes the kid misbehaves and they're actually supported by the parents. They're not siding with the teachers nowadays. And then the other thing too is that also too, that sometimes when a child or a parent assaults a teacher, there's not a lot of support to punish that child or that parent, or sometimes they'll say suspend the kid instead of pressing assault charges or putting them in the psych ward, or saying, okay, maybe the kid needs anger issues, or they need to go to a police station for a couple of hours. That happens as well. And then there's also that thing about toxic protesting, because nowadays people will protest anything, because it's really just joining the mob, really, and unfortunately that does happen. I can't think of examples, but I think the big one nowadays is that there's a lot of Free Palestine. There's a lot of anti-Semitic protesting around America nowadays. But no matter what you believe in with that, honestly too, that like when people were overtaking a university, or when people were actually breaking the law to protest their point, really, we can all agree that there's freedom of speech, there's freedom of protesting. But when you cross a line, really, then that's not okay. And that's kind of almost like what you see in this short film, was that they're all protesting a wrong answer. I believe that she goes to a crowd of people and people are grabbing her, and that's not okay, really. So there's a sense of toxic protesting. Clearly this time they're all agreeing to a wrong point, which is 2 + 2 = 4, and that's free thinking to think that way. And in the real world, when it comes to money and other things like that, that's actually kind of when you will say no, because you don't want to be you don't want to get screwed out of what you owe, really. So I kind of like the ending. And also too, she's an older teacher, so that's kind of that metaphor of the old school versus the new school, where the old school way of parenting and teaching was, okay, they'll have a parent teacher conference with this kid, and he can't do math that well. They'll drag his ass in there, and they'll be like, okay, this kid needs to practice math every single day, and he has a behavior issue. The parent will be to the child. That's how it was in the 90s. But nowadays, there's so much support for children, even when children are wrong, really. There's to the teacher nowadays. So definitely an older teacher is kind of a good metaphor for the fact that how we've kind of times have really changed, where now it's more support for kids and their unruly behavior, and saying they're free thinking, or they're expressing themselves, or they may have a mental health issue, instead of actually just living in a world where we're saying, okay, well, the kid is actually wrong for their behavior, needs to be held accountable for their behavior, needs to be held accountable for believing information that's incorrect, like 2 + 2 = 22. So I do really think that having older teachers kind of metaphor for that, by saying the old school generation's going away, and saying, what, okay, things like, incorrect math, and preaching that math can be incorrect and there's only one right answer. That's that's archaic, when that's actually, foolish. So I do think it's a very cerebral short film. I was able to watch it on Facebook. I'm not sure if it's on YouTube or anything like that. But, 2 + 2 = 22. I would type that in to search. I don't think it even has a name yet, but it is a really good satire. Very like South Park-esque, without like kind of like the crudeness of South Park, but very South Park-esque satire about like how people can be very ridiculous nowadays, and how definitely we have to really think about how we're parenting our kids, and how we're not so supportive of teachers. Those things are issues nowadays. That we can have children that are growing up wrong in other ways, such as their ethics, such as being really stubborn, and such as being supported when they are actually wrong. So it's a very good satirical short film.